Good morning, everybody. This press conference was called to talk about the spring statement tomorrow and the state of the UK economy, but there are one or two rather important international and indeed national issues that I want to address right at the very beginning. Our policy towards Iran has been wrong ever since 2015, and I've said so consistently over the years. The JCPOA deal, so approved of by President Obama, the European Union, and subsequently not just the Foreign Office but Boris Johnson, has been an act of appeasement that has freed up tens of billions of dollars, much of which has been used by the Iranian regime to back terrorist organisations right across the world. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, just a few to name. There are, of course, big risks with the American actions and Israeli actions that were taken over the course of the weekend, but equally enormous risks in doing nothing, in allowing Iran to go on, funding these extremist terrorist organisations, attacking shipping, and doing everything they can to build a nuclear bomb. I do believe the American president and the Israelis are right in what they're doing, and I find the actions of our Prime Minister, or the inactions, perhaps I should say, of our Prime Minister, frankly pathetic. I think to have said to the Americans that they could not use UK bases or Diego Garcia to carry out any of their missions is something that the President has responded to already by saying that he's deeply disappointed. I suspect that, for once from Trump, is actually a mild understatement. And I do believe that Starmer's actions don't just threaten the special relationship, but probably he has posed, or did pose, a major threat to NATO. To watch television yesterday morning to see John Healey was just unbelievable. Sticking to this vague concept of international law, unable to say whether the actions that had been taken were right, and then when he was told that 2 missiles had been fired at the RAF base on Cyprus, he said he thought it wasn't deliberate. Well, now it's all too real, as evacuation notices have gone out on that base over the course of the last hour. I hope and pray that a better alternative comes for Iran and the rather wonderful Persian people, but I suspect that it won't be straightforward or easy. There is at least one offer on the table, which is that of a constitutional monarchy. We'll see, ultimately, whether that's what the people of Iran want. I must also follow up from the by-election in Greater Manchester last week. Massive thanks from me to Democracy Volunteers, a thoroughly credible organisation run by well-known people, because I've been talking about this very openly since 2015. The mass harvesting of postal ballots, where in many cases, when doors are knocked on, people say they never saw the postal ballot themselves, even in the first place. And so they've done us a huge favour by talking about this practice of family voting, of people going in groups into the polling booth and effectively being told where to put that vote. 62% of polling stations in that constituency saw witnesses see family voting. If that's the pressure exerted in the polling booth, you can only imagine what other pressures there will be. I was also shocked to learn of the extent to which Commonwealth voting had gone. That basically all you have to do is to prove that you usually reside somewhere to be able to vote in an election. The fact you've got a passport from Pakistan doesn't seem to matter. The fact you've only been in the country a couple of years doesn't seem to matter. The fact you can't speak a word of English doesn't seem to matter. And I've now learned that Nick Dubois, who was the Conservative MP for North London, discovered in 2011 that there were 300 asylum seekers in Enfield alone who'd been put on the electoral register. So rather than just me complaining about this for years and being told that it was sour grapes, I think we are going to have a very big, open, honest debate about this. I certainly believe, ahead of May the 7th, that every single area that has elections needs to think very hard about who is on their register. I certainly believe that the postal voting register, as it currently stands, ought to be scrapped. And I think we should go back to the way that it was. You can get a proxy vote, you can get a postal vote, but you have to apply for it and you have to have a good reason. And how interesting that in France, and I very rarely quote France as being a country we should copy on anything, but in France you have to turn up and you have to vote in the privacy of the polling booth and prove your identity and be on the register. And French election results come incredibly quickly, and I can't think of one that's ever led to the subject of a row in terms of the integrity of the elections. So they're just a few of my thoughts on that. I'll be outlining some more of this at Westminster Hall later on this evening. Not only is Britain broken, not only is our politics broken, but our democratic system is broken too. And reform will fight for change, just as we fought to get the voting rights back for 4.6 million people who will now have the vote on May the 7th against the connivance of the other parties, all of them actually, Labour, Conservative and the Liberal Democrats. And with that, ahead of the spring statement, I will hand over to Robert Jenrick.
Well, thank you, Nigel, and good morning, everyone. Now, you don't need me to tell you that our economy is broken. The Chancellor Rachel Reeves will stand up tomorrow and claim that we are turning a corner. But the numbers speak for themselves. 331,000 people who were in work when she became Chancellor are now unemployed. Our youngsters are bearing the brunt of this, with those not in work, training or education rising to 957,000. Almost 1 million young people. That's 1 in 7, more than anywhere in the developed world. More of them out of work than during COVID. For the first time, youth unemployment here is more than in Europe. But it's not just the numbers. People's everyday experiences tell us how the economy is performing. A few weeks ago, I was speaking to a mum of one in Newark who told me about her son. He left college more than a year ago. He achieved good grades, for which he worked very hard, but she explained that he still hasn't been able to find work, and he's beginning to lose hope. Is Rachel Reeves concerned about this young man? About the hundreds of thousands like him? Or is, as we set out today, she too busy cozying up to people with abhorrent views to keep her job and hold on to her seat? Well, I'll say more on that in a moment. We also have inflation, the rate at which people's household costs rise, at 3%, half over its target of 2%. The rate at which Rachel Reeves found it when she walked into the Treasury in 2024. It's nearly double the Eurozone average, the highest in the G7. People are experiencing this in lots of ways, with higher energy and water bills and the surging cost of groceries, which is making life tough for everyone. And at the same time, wages are clearly flatlining. The economy is shrinking per person. We're getting poorer. All our economy's warning lights are flashing red right now. Be under no illusions. The final 3 months of last year saw a record jump in the number of businesses in financial distress. Much of our industry is simply disappearing. Oil and gas is being banned, as is diesel car manufacturing. Car production is at a 73-year low. Cement production is at a 70-year low. Glass, the worst in 70 years. Chemicals, steel, paper, ceramics, they're all struggling. And so much of it comes back to Labour's mismanagement of our economy. I couldn't put it better than Wes Streeting did. There is no growth strategy at all. A terrible energy policy, pathetic house building numbers. But the original sin, the biggest mistake, was Rachel Reeves's tax rises. She pledged she'd raise taxes by £8 billion a year. Instead, she's hiked them by £67 billion. All her tax rises have made it incredibly difficult for working people to get by. Take two parents earning £30,000 a year. they'll be £5,000 worse off annually by 2030 because of her tax rises. And they have been lethal for businesses, business rates, energy bills, labour costs, the self-defeating Employment Rights Act. Any one of these measures individually would have been costly. But Labour have chosen to inflict them all on our businesses at once. And above all, the rise in national insurance. It's a year since this tax hike, and its impact has been devastating. Take a small restaurant or service business with 9 employees. Altogether, their costs could be rising by up to £50,000 this year alone. Of course they can't cope. Of course they've had to stop hiring. They've let people go. This is why we have the jobs crisis. So remember when Rachel Reeves boasts tomorrow about record tax receipts. She's really boasting about her record tax increases that have caused record pain. They're suffocating families and businesses. The root of this problem is the wasteful spending. When Reeves came in, she increased spending by £60 billion a year. But Labour have wasted most of this money. £15 billion a year on migrant benefits, over £5 billion on asylum, £15 billion on foreign aid, the exploding benefits bill, those who go out to work, paying for those who choose not to. A reform government will set this right. As we've already set out, we will cut wasteful spending and responsibly bring down taxes for our people and our businesses. We'll stop the betrayal of alarm clock Britain. In the coming weeks, we'll be setting out detailed, carefully thought through plans for additional cuts in welfare spending to show you that when the government takes your money, we will actually be careful with it and ensure that it is not sprayed around, but it's spent in your interests. Because that is what has gone wrong. Britain's economy hasn't been run in the British people's interests. Past governments, this government, Reeves, Starmer, they've all had other priorities. And what is more emblematic of that than Rachel Reeves' relationship with her friend, Arshad Khatani, that we have exposed today. Khatani is a local power broker in the community from Pakistan. As one of the chairs of the Leeds Council of Mosques, he's thrown the weight of his support and community behind the Chancellor. But who really is he? Well, Reeves describes him as her friend. She has a long-standing friendship that apparently continues to this very day. A man who said that those who speak against Islam are an evil gang that he will help to destroy, who shared a video about the Pakistani military which glorified terrorists from 2 terror groups, and hosted preachers with vile views at his Leeds mosque. One said we shouldn't use Google because it was run by the Jews. Another is infamous for supporting a despicable Islamist murderer. Khatani has shared conspiracy theories about 9/11 and an international lending mafia backed by Zionist Rothschild criminals. He's called for revenge against India and asked for everyone to get together and finish these evils on earth. What is our Chancellor playing at? Where is her judgment? She's lobbied previous governments on this man's behalf over Kashmir, and she's asked for his views on foreign policy. Since she was made Chancellor, she's even popped round to his house for lunch. His terms for their friendship were made very clear in his own words. He said he would only support Reeves and Labour if they do what I demand. So that's our Chancellor, working on behalf of people like Khatani. I would say that she's a useful idiot, but she knew what she was doing, didn't she? And now she needs to answer for it. This is a shocking example of the crisis that we now face today. sectarian politics in our towns and cities, more focused on issues taking place thousands of miles away from here, and represented by the most senior people in government, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Labour and the Green Party fighting for these votes by outdoing each other in cheating more and creating more anti-British policies. We don't want elections for our national parliament to be exploited by foreign voters who campaign in foreign languages, often under foreign flags, about foreign conflicts thousands of miles away. That's why Nigel and Reform have said that we will bring our voting laws in line with other similar countries, such as Canada, Japan, and Germany, to rule that only British people can vote in parliamentary elections. If British people want to cast their vote on concerns about foreign conflicts, then that is their prerogative. But we're not going to allow foreign citizens to come here and vote on those issues. Under Reform, we will always put British people first. Those who get up in the morning, work hard, and pay their taxes, but who are sick of seeing their taxes wasted by politicians more interested in problems thousands of miles away. No more. Led by Nigel, a Reform government will not just stand by and watch British people suffer. We will be there for them. We will put divisive, backward, sectarian politics, like that practiced by Rachel Reeves, to one side. We'll unite the country. We'll concentrate on what really matters to people. We will be focused on taking care with people's money by cutting wasteful spending and benefits for those who don't need them, which means that then we can cut your bills and your taxes, bring back good jobs, and finally turn our country around. Thank you.
Right, let us begin our questions. First on the list is Catherine Forster, GB News.
Thank you, Catherine Forster, GB News. With Iran, would you attach any conditions to UK support of the United States and Israel, given that the last time we had a British Prime Minister tell a US President we'll be with you whatever, it didn't end terribly well? And also on the by-election, Zach Polanski told our political editor Chris Hope that you were a sore loser. What's your reaction to that? And you're not saying, are you, that if it hadn't been for family voting or postal voting, you'd have actually won the seat?
Well, it wasn't postal voting that caused the row, it was family voting. What I'm saying is if that's what's happening in 68% of polling stations, can you imagine what happens with postal votes? I've been saying this since 2015. I said it since a box of postal votes in Oldham West came in and there were 100% votes for the Labour candidate. I regard that as being statistically, literally impossible amongst any group of human beings. I said the election was bent and I was accused of sour grapes. In Peterborough, in 2019, in a parliamentary by-election, Richard Tice and I were witness to just the most astonishing corrupt practices. And actually the Labour Party even had one of their official counters in the room had been to prison before for voter fraud. I tried endlessly with the Conservatives to say we need to do something about the postal voting register, about the way that these things operate, to which I was said, oh well, old boy, it's jolly good for us in the rural areas. Now, the monster that Tony Blair created back in 2000 with the PPERA Act, which has been massively to Labour's benefit, massively to their benefit over the last 25 years, is now working against them as we see this new form of religious sectarian voting. And I'm saying this, we've got a massive set of elections coming up on May the 7th. The whole of Wales, the whole of Scotland, the whole of London, thousands of council seats up and down the country, some in rural areas, but many in big inner city areas like Birmingham, for argument's sake. 34% of the turnout in last year's local elections was postal. And they were nearly all rural seats. So you may well find that there are council elections determined where up to 50% of the vote will be postal vote, and I don't trust the postal voting system. I don't trust the electoral register. And what I am saying is two things. One, only British passport holders should vote in British general elections or by-elections for Parliament, absolutely. And two, since you asked the question, I'm absolutely convinced that amongst British-born voters, Matthew Goodwin came first in that election last week. Of that, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. On our relationship with America, well, we can say yes and we can say no. We said no over Vietnam, probably Harold Wilson's finest achievement. We said yes over Iraq, but we did so under the false premise that, not only was Saddam a bad man, well, we knew that, but that he posed a direct threat to us, which wasn't true, and something that Blair never, ever, ever was able to live down. The question is, does Iran pose a threat to us? Yes. It's posing a threat right now to 250,000 British people living in Dubai, probably up to 500,000 living across the whole of the Middle East. And we still have the IRGC allowed to continue their operations in London. Even the European Union have found the spine to say they should be prescribed. Allied to that, there are many, many other so-called charities with links to the Iranian regime in this country. They are the primary sponsors of global terror. And I believe that this is a just mission. And I think we've made some terrible mistakes over the course of the last week. And what is clear to me is that our Prime Minister is not a leader, he's a follower. And he looks weak in the eyes of everybody. Thank you. Sorry, long answer. Harry Farley, BBC.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. Harry Farley from BBC. You said the Prime Minister should have supported the American and Israeli attacks on Iran and should have allowed British military bases to be used for those. Donald Trump has explicitly said the aim of those strikes was regime change. Can you be very clear, do you support regime change in the Middle East?
I do support regime change in this case, yes. And by the way, my record, if you look at it, I was against the Iraq war. I couldn't see the right purpose. I was livid about the attempt to remove Gaddafi, not because I support people like this, but I can see that actually getting rid of them is going to lead to even more chaos and more suffering than exists in the first place. This is, I firmly believe that freed up, the Persian people can go on and achieve the most extraordinary things. So yes, I do personally support regime change very much indeed. But, the Prime Minister should have thought about our relationship with America, but equally the long-term implications for NATO. And apparently there was a problem with international law. The human rights lawyers that run our organization. This is a vile, barbarous regime spreading its terror. Already they've attacked British shipping. The Houthis have fired rockets at British shipping going back over the last couple of years. So we had every reason to say yes to the Israelis and yes to the Americans. We didn't, and now we're playing catch-up. I suppose better late than never. Thank you. Tim Baker, Sky News.
Tim Baker, Sky News. What would your approach be to the refugees that will be caused by this conflict? And on voter ID, would you accept digital voter ID to replace the current system?
I'm going to come out with a lot more detailed plans on this, but just simply turning up with a passport isn't good enough. Do I support digital ID? No, I don't. But a passport's pretty good. It's quite hard to forge. The question is, who is given the ability to vote? And it's the reason I highlighted the Nick Dubois case. And this is back in 2011 that he raised this issue. I've been campaigning on this since 2015, not quite as long as Nick, but I've been doing it for a long, long time. It is about eligibility to be on the register. And by the way, I think if you're 97 or you're in a wheelchair or you're working abroad, you're entitled to a postal or proxy vote. I would say that postal votes should never make up more than 1 to 2% of the overall result, as is the case in France. There's a lot we can learn when it comes to elections and being strict about how we do it from the French. Anything from you on that? Refugees. Oh, look, sorry. I would be very nervous. I'm always nervous, of young, fit men coming from war zones as refugees. And we have to be very thoughtful and very cautious about this indeed. Very. Let us move on to Sam Merriman from the Daily Mail.
Thank you. Mr Jenrick, Labour has suspended Katana's membership of the party this morning following your revelations.
Well done.
But there's obviously been no action taken against Rachel Reeves. So can I be clear, are you saying the Prime Minister should sack or reprimand his Chancellor over this? And for Mr Farage, in light of the Middle East crisis and subsequent rises in oil prices, should Rachel Reeves cancel the planned hike in fuel duty to protect motorists? Thank you.
Well, firstly on Mr Katana, it's interesting to learn that he was a member of the Labour Party, which we didn't know until this morning. But I find it completely incredible that Rachel Reeves did not know who this man was, what his views were, what threat he posed to her community in Leeds and our country. This is a man who we know she has met at least 27 times, whose home she's visited for lunch, who she follows on social media. She's taking us for complete and utter fools. So I would like to see Rachel Reeves come out and explain her relationship with him. Why was she consorting with him? Does she condemn him completely? And distance herself from the kind of sectarian politics that we're seeing now infecting so much of our political system. And to see the Chancellor of the Exchequer, one of the most senior people in our politics, at the heart of that kind of politics is shocking and very disturbing, and she needs to explain herself today.
If I'd been photographed at a cocktail party with some violent right-wing extremist, I mean, these press conferences would be dominated by it for the next 6 months. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that if you've known somebody, not just met once, but known for 10 years, visited each other's houses, has been a big, important factor in getting a certain Pakistani Kashmiri Muslim vote going your way in that constituency, I think it's pretty reasonable to say that surely she must have known something wasn't quite right. Oil prices are up, obviously. They're about $80 a barrel, Straits of Hormuz being the big worry. I would say two things. Number one, yes, no rise on fuel duty, but number two, whilst oil may be determined by global spot prices, which it is, gas actually isn't. And we should be producing as much oil and gas as we possibly can in this country, firstly, in terms of security, and secondly, when it comes to gas, we can do so much more cheaply than we can buy it when we're getting LNG coming from America or from Qatar. Geneviève Holallen from The Telegraph.
Hi, thanks, Nigel. First of all, to you've said that you want the postal vote register scrapped. So under your plans, are you saying that everyone who currently can have a postal vote should have to reapply? And are there any specific conditions which currently exist? For example, if you're on holiday when a vote is about to happen, do you think that should not be sufficient grounds to have a postal vote anymore?
Let us be clear. When this was brought in, back in 2000 by Blair, the argument was it's more convenient to vote by post. But you've got a farcical situation where a by-election can be called at short notice, the postal votes land on the mat in 6 days' time, the actual vote isn't for another 3.5 weeks, and you're actually asking large segments of the electorate to vote at different times with different levels of knowledge about the candidates, the campaigns, and the policies. And that, frankly, makes no sense at all. So the convenience argument needs to go out of the window. Actually, turning up to vote is a very important part of the democratic process. And this has been used, frankly, by all parties. Get their most loyal supporters on the postal register. You don't need to go and knock on those doors, because you know that vote is in the bag already. And I think we should go back to get a postal vote, you need a valid reason. And a valid reason is the election's on May the 7th, let's say for argument's sake these elections, and you email the local returning officer to say, I'm on holiday. And guess what? You get a postal vote. Or, as I say, you're very elderly, you're very infirm, you're working abroad. I'm not saying we should scrap postals and proxies. What I am saying is they should make up about 1 to 2% of the turnout, whereas now they're making up 18%, 22% of the vote in national elections, but in certain inner city areas, they're making up well over half of the vote. And I think it is massively open to fraud, abuse, and intimidation. And I've seen I've actually watched the postman deliver postal votes, and then a nice man knocks at the door and says, I've come to collect your postal vote. And Mrs. Smith's 84 and feels intimidated by it. By the way, this is not just a problem in the Muslim community, it's wider than that. But I do actually think there's so much talk in politics about women's rights, violence against women. This crops up in Parliament pretty much every single week. Well, what about women's freedoms to exercise their own judgment in a democratic society? And removing automatic postal votes, you just say you want one, and maintaining the privacy of the individual, that sacrosanct idea, the privacy of the individual in the polling booth would do an awful lot for that.
Thank you for that. Also, just one to you, Rob, if I may. A subject that's been coming up in recent weeks is tuition fees, student tuition fees. Do you think that something needs to be done on this? And if you were Chancellor, would you be looking to make changes to help graduates in terms of their loans? Thank you.
Well, as we've said on a number of occasions, the interest rates being levied at the moment are far too high. They are usurious. We want to see what the government come forward with, and we're told that they're going to do something in the coming days. So we'll listen carefully to that. There are big sums of money at stake here, £2 or £3 billion to correct the current unfairness, and that's a lot of money. We've been very clear that in reform, we're not going to make tax and spend commitments that we haven't thought through in the most careful and deliberative way. We're not going to make things up on the hoof like some of the other parties do. We certainly don't want to see 100,000 British students lose their places and those places be filled by more foreign students, as has happened in recent years, where people have been coming into the country for immigration purposes more than for education. And we want the focus primarily to be on getting good quality apprenticeships. So universities, particularly some of our regional universities, focusing more on the economy and the skills of their communities than on courses of low quality or feeding foreign students and that market. So we'll listen carefully to what the government have to say. Just to back up what Nigel said a moment ago, I think the proposals that Reform have put out should unite everyone in politics. What is more important than stamping out men telling women how to vote in elections? This is clearly an anti-British practice. It goes against all of our values, and I hope people on all sides of politics come forward and support the proposals that we're going to be putting forward.
On tuition fees, we're back to that nice Mr. Blair again, aren't we? That lovely Mr. Blair. Up to 50% of people should go to university. The Conservatives supporting it, is it any wonder? They had to keep putting up the fees. And I do remember when base was 0.5%, actually student loans were being repaid at 6%. So usury, it's a bit of an old-fashioned word, but I think it does actually apply. Aaron Newbury from The Express.
Good morning. Mr. Farage, you've spoken quite extensively about the Prime Minister's perceived inaction on Iran. What specific actions would you like to see the UK taking in that region? And Mr. Jenrick, you've spoken today about reforms to the welfare system. Are you able to categorically confirm that there will be no changes to the state pension or the triple lock in those reforms?
British sovereign territory is under attack. It's not an accident, Mr. Healy. They are, we've been hit this morning at least once that I know of. There's been an evacuation. That base is British sovereign territory. So I think that the gloves need to come off. We need to accept that we're part of this with the Americans, with the Israelis, with the support of the Australians, with the support of the... Isn't it interesting that even those centre-left governments in Canada and Australia thought this was the right thing to do whilst the PM dithered? I guess it's because McSweeney's gone. Because, up until now, he's given a piece of paper by McSweeney and he reads it out, and that's called leadership. And with McSweeney gone, he doesn't know what to do, is all that I can guess. But no, we've got, as I say, we have to take the gloves off. We have to get rid of this regime. We have to do everything we can to try to ensure that what comes afterwards is better. Does it come with risks? Yes, it does. And I fully understand that. But I repeat the point that to do nothing probably carries graver risks. Okay.
Shall I just answer a question on pensions?
Please.
Look, well, we've been very clear that we want to ensure that there is dignity and security for pensioners in the last decades of their lives. We're not going to make an announcement today on the triple lock. But on welfare more generally, we want to ensure that we bring the welfare bill down. It's ballooning at the moment. frankly, it's going to bankrupt the country. That's why we set out the changes that we have already, £25 billion of reductions in welfare. We said that we were going to bring back the two-child benefit cap in full under Reform government. And in the weeks to come, we're going to be saying more about wasteful spending that we have identified and setting out what I hope will be seen to be the most comprehensive plan of any of the political parties to reform our welfare system and back the people that we're in business for, Alarm Clock Britain, which is hard-working people who are in work and want to ensure that their tax are not being spent on those people who choose not to work.
It was ironic, wasn't it, seeing the winning Green candidate talking about hard-working people when she won the by-election. I'm not sure that anyone that voted Green works, but there we are. Adam Cherry from Guido Fawkes.
Thank you. Given the international context at the moment, you still don't have a shadow foreign secretary or a shadow defence secretary. So are you now accelerating those plans? What sort of personal profile are you looking for when filling those jobs?
No, it's a fair point, and I had decided that actually appointing 4 big positions, and by the way, on tuition fees, Suella will be doing a press conference this Wednesday. So I thought 4 big appointments, getting those people settled into their roles and cooperating with each other, because there's a huge crossover with all of these things. I'm sure that Zia Youssef will be talking about our friend from Leeds later on today. So they're the 4 big things, and yes, I do want to do foreign affairs. I want to do it along with defence, but I'll never be rushed. I'll do it when I'm ready. Thank you. Noah Keat, Politico.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Nigel Farage, Ed Davey has said that MPs should get a vote on the US using UK air bases. What's your stance on that? And how open would you be to the UK committing ground troops into Iran if the conflict continues to escalate, given that you said the gloves should come off? Thank you.
I would very much wish British troops not to go into Iran, but we do still have something of an air force left and something of a navy left, and we have reasonably good intelligence as well. We should do all we can to support the operation. I'll make that perfectly clear. Okay, let's keep going. Noah Hoffman, The Sun.
Thank you, Ms. Farage. Do you think Reform voters generally would support the idea of your position, would support your position on being involved in the war, or do you think there's some crossover between Reform voters and MAGA voters who just want to stay out of foreign conflicts at any cost? And Mr. Jenrick, we've actually seen yesterday that Anas Sarwar's father, who himself was once a Labour MP, has posted an emotive tribute to the dead Ayatollah, saying that he was a martyr and that he was a good voice of resistance. What is your reaction to that? Thank you.
It's a bit of the devil's say, isn't it, really?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen that. I'm not entirely surprised. Look, that's clearly completely disgraceful. I was shown this morning by a young student the University College London tributes to the Ayatollah. I mean, imagine if you're, well, anyone, frankly, but particularly Jewish or Persian students at that university seeing that. You know, these are values which are completely wrong. They're what Reform is fighting against. We want a united country where we have zero tolerance for extremism and those who celebrate it in this way.
Yes, and the Greens deputy leader, that charming chap, Mohsin Ali, he was out protesting in favour of the Iranian regime at the weekend. Corbyn was there too, obviously. Didn't see any talk about the environment in the by-election. Quite extraordinary. Look, a British sovereign base is under attack. Are people nervous about getting involved in foreign wars, given the extent of 20 years in Afghanistan and then giving it all back to the Taliban? Of course they are, and I understand that. But as I say, this is very different to the Iraq decision. Very, very different. Because, yes, they do pose a threat to the whole of the Middle East, to the world, and indeed to us as well. And it's a cause that I've personally felt very strongly, for many, 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 many years. The world would be a better place without these ghastly people. Samara Gill, Talk TV.
Marangale, Talk TV. Mr. Farage, would a reform government have allowed US forces to use UK air bases for offensive operations in Iran? And what do you think is behind Starmer's logic when he is still not prescribing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, not removing the ambassador, and still allowing the embassy to operate? And to Jenrick, can you state clearly this morning in regards to Ashad Katana that you are alleging misconduct or not?
Okay, there's a whole load of things to unpack there. Yes is the answer to your question. I would have said to the Americans, please do use our bases. We will be supportive of you on this. Whether this does go to a debate or a vote in the House of Commons, we will have to see. But as I say, British sovereign territory is under attack. We have, I don't think, really very much choice. Robert?
Well, as to Mr. Katana, he's clearly behaved in a completely appalling manner. He's consorted with individuals who are highly dangerous. He's celebrated terror groups. We'll have to see whether any action is taken by the police, for example. But more importantly, it's the conduct of the Chancellor that I'm focused on. You know, what is the judgment of Rachel Reeves? To be seen time and again, to go to the house of this man, to describe him as her friend, to use him, as she clearly has, as one of her chief lieutenants in her constituency, presumably to try and round up votes from particular communities and get her over the line at general elections. Exactly the kind of sectarian politics that is infecting so many parts of our country right now. I want to hear Rachel Reeves explain herself today. If she doesn't, well, I'll ask her on the floor of the House of Commons tomorrow when she comes to do her spring statement. Why did she do this? Is she in the pocket of this man? Why was she consorting with him? And does she think this is the behaviour that British people would expect of their Chancellor of the Exchequer?
It's another classic example of our democratic norms being destroyed by mass migration and a different set and sense of priorities taking over, and Labour now desperate to hang on to this vote that they'd taken for granted. Although, you know, when I say pointing the finger at Labour, perhaps actually it's the Boris Johnson government we should really be pointing the finger at. Because many of those who voted in that by-election last Thursday came in as part of the Boris wave. They're not integrated into Britain, many don't speak the language at all, and yet they're now having a profound effect upon policy of national parties and outcomes in elections. And that is not sour grapes, that is we were never going to win that constituency. But we did very, very well. And particularly if you look at the Denton part of the constituency, where we scored somewhere between 45 and 50% of the vote. If we can replicate that on May the 7th across much of the north of England and the Midlands, you're going to see some very, very big results indeed. Not many commentators seem to have picked that up, although Andrew Neil did quite effectively, I thought, in the Mail on Saturday. Aggie Chambray from LBC. Is she here?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you very much, Nigel. Can I just ask, you've talked about the gloves coming off and talked about wanting to support regime change. Can I just ask what exactly that would mean? For example, if there were to be British boots on the ground, would you support that?
No. No, I don't want to do that. I think that would be a huge mistake. And I genuinely believe there has been a vast number of people living in Iran that have wanted to get rid of this regime. They came out in January and they were massacred in, well, we actually believe now possibly in their tens of thousands. This would be a great liberation. I genuinely believe that. I genuinely believe that. But we couldn't put boots on the ground. We've barely got an army left. Even if we wanted to do it, we don't have the operational capacity to attempt anything on that scale that would be meaningful at all. But no, I don't want us to get dragged into it, but there's a heck of a lot we can do to help and support our allies in this.
What that support would look like if not boots on the ground?
It's Royal Air Force, it's Royal Navy, and it's intelligence. And actually, we're still pretty good at things like intelligence, although the Israelis arguably are better. Helen Corbett from the Press Association.
Thank you. Nigel, you said that you're convinced that your candidate, Matt Goodwin, would have won among British-born voters. With your policy that you've announced to restrict voting to British citizens, are you not worried that that comes across as trying to cut out voters that wouldn't vote for reform? And then to both of you, your colleague Danny Kruger the other day said that the UK is suffering from having a totally unregulated sexual economy. I was wondering if you could unpack what that means and what reform plans to do about it.
I think we'll leave the more Christian, religious aspects of this sort of thing to Danny himself, so you can ask him any time you like. He's worried about the collapse of good behaviour and morals in our society. By the way, I'm not saying he's wrong, but I think perhaps he's the person you should ask. Look, if you're here from abroad, you're living in London, you're a foreign national, but you're paying council tax, I think you've got every right to vote in local elections. Absolutely. And the whole issue of Commonwealth voting was never really a problem until the age of mass migration. And now it's been impacting on our elections for a very, very long time, yet there have been hardly any of us prepared to stand up and speak out on this issue. And that is why the report that was issued last Thursday by Democracy Volunteers is so useful. And yes, I do believe for national elections, they should be voted on by British voters only. Absolutely. Otherwise, we get a really very, very perverse influence on our politics where people are voting more about Gaza than they are about Gorton.
And I would just add, this is something that happens in many other countries. France, the United States,
normal countries.
Japan. Many normal countries do this, and it has very widespread support.
And that's the remarkable thing about reform. Many of you try and paint us out to be radicals. We're not. We just want to be a normal country. And normal countries protect their borders, protect their democratic systems, know what works and what doesn't. And we've allowed all of this to slowly but surely disintegrate over the course of the last few years. And we're going to correct it, as we did when we fought to get those voting rights back for 4.6 million people. This cause of having the correct registers, of stopping corrupt voting, is one that I'm going to pursue every day from here on, and we are going to win it, I'm certain. Because oddly, it now actually suits the Labour government to clear up the mess, which is why they'll do it.
So to those people who might be worried that you're trying to restrict the voting for the party's benefit, what would you say to them?
We're going to become a normal country. A normal country, like most countries around the world. That's all we're asking for. Isn't that radical? Isn't that dangerous? It's really, really normal, I promise you. Thank you. Moving on to Lucy White, Bloomberg.
Thank you. I wanted to ask around some of the comments that Yvette Cooper made earlier this morning. She said that the government was careful that it was learning lessons from the Iraq War. What lessons do you think should have been learned from the Iraq War? And in those other places that you listed earlier where you disagreed with regime change, what's the difference this time? And if I could ask as well, you mentioned about your concerns for women being able to vote freely. In the last US election, there were concerns raised about growing tradwife culture online and husbands being able to influence, or women surrendering their vote to their husband. Yeah. Are you concerned about tradwife culture in the UK on the rise?
I'm concerned that America's gone down this same route, that huge numbers of votes in America are now early voting. And as I said, all the reasons I laid out earlier, that the electorate having the same information at the same period of time apply in America equally as much as they do here. The only way you can stop these influences is, as I say, to bring back the privacy of the polling booth, unless you have an exceptional reason to want a postal or proxy vote. It's nice to see that Yvette Cooper's come out of hiding. I'm pleased about that. The fundamental difference is that Saddam Hussein and Iraq posed no direct threat to us. And the Prime Minister of the day knew that, and knew the British public wouldn't accept it, because despite the fact that he's a really bad guy, there are an awful lot of bad guys around the world. So they had to invent a reason that would resonate in the minds of the British public. I think this is much easier to explain. I think people know that, for example, the October the 7th massacres were paid for by the Iranians. I think people know that this is the epicenter of global terrorism, extreme anti-Semitism, and so I think actually the common sense of the British people will see that we're doing the right thing. And even if this argument was a difficult one 48 hours ago, with the attack on Cyprus today, it actually becomes a much easier one, in my view. Okay, we've got a few more left. Joanna Marchand.
Hi, thanks. Question for Jenrick. The party recently promised a Great Repeal Act to take a bonfire to Labour's Employment Rights Act. Does this aim to restore the 2016 Trade Union Act, or will it go further and introduce a 60% turnout mandate for all strike ballots to ensure the repeal of rights doesn't return Britain to a period of industrial instability as seen in the 1970s?
Well, we've said we're going to bring forward a serious piece of legislation, which we're going to work on in the months and years ahead, so that it's ready to go on day one. It will carefully unpick the changes that we've seen under this Labour government, some of whose roots lie in the last Conservative government as well, whether that's the Employment Rights Act or the Renters' Reform Act, which are well-intentioned, superficially attractive, but in many cases having a very damaging effect on the economy, in particular on employment. And we see that writ large today, where employment is rising month after month after month, particularly amongst the young. So it would be irresponsible for us not to want to take action and to fix this. We will look again at the trade union protections that are within the Employment Rights Act, but we're going to be setting that out more carefully in the months ahead.
We just want people to have jobs, so it's quite simple, really. Ben Quinn from The Guardian.
Thanks. On regime change and Iran, if we cast aside the last battered remnants of international law, what do we fall back on in terms of a moral case for preventing a Chinese strike on Taiwan, regime change there, or even Putin's war against Ukraine? And on voting, you're talking about disenfranchising British Commonwealth voters, yet I think you are making an exception for another cohort of foreigners, Irish people. What is the difference? What would you say to people who suspect maybe there's a racial dimension to that idea?
Well, they could be from Australia. They could be from Canada. That is not the point. And by the way, as far as Ireland's concerned, we haven't proposed any change to that relationship. It's a deeper historical link. And of course, British citizens can vote if they're living over in the Republic. We're not questioning that for one moment. Seems to me that in sort of Hermer land and Labour land, that international law is a very good reason for doing nothing, least of all the important things that you ought to be doing. And I think actually there was a moral imperative to get rid of, a genuine moral imperative to get rid of this awful regime that has been there for 47 years, caused such human misery, and now because of the idiocy of our own leaders in 2015, and the Americans and our friends in Brussels, have been able to sponsor global terrorism in a large way. I think the moral imperative is to do something rather than not. And I just don't get this bunch. If they're so obsessed with human rights, well, what about the poor old Chagossians? And by the way, if you think Donald Trump is going to soften his position on Diego Garcia after the last week, you've got another thing coming. Right, couple more. Ashley Coburn from The Mirror.
Where do you both stand on votes at 16? And if this becomes law, will you leave the legislation in place?
If he wants to bring in votes at 16, that's fine. If he wants to do it, fine from our perspective as a party. We'll get loads of votes. The Greens will probably get even more, and Labour will get hardly any. No, look, I think my view, very, very simple. You should not be able to vote in an election unless you're also eligible to be a candidate. When it comes to Parliament itself or even local council. And I don't think we want 16-year-olds as candidates and 16-year-olds being in the House of Commons. That's the logic that I've always applied to it. I think 18 probably is right. But look, We will argue against it. If it passes, we'll go with it, and it may well benefit us. You know, there's no doubt Gen Z are looking at things, a large chunk of Gen Z are looking at things very differently to the millennials. Very, very differently indeed. And I think you'll find amongst that generation, you know, if you look at social media followings and things like that, I think you'll find there are more of them look at my stuff, probably laugh at some of it too, but look at my stuff than we do the Prime Minister. Okay, two more. George Parker, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. Two questions quickly. One is you talked about John Healey sticking to the vague concept of international law. I'd just like to challenge you a bit on that. Do you accept there is such a thing as international law? And if you were Prime Minister, would you try to adhere to it? And the second one relating to Arshad Khatana. The Labour Party has just unearthed a picture of you visiting his mosque in 2013 and saying how much you enjoyed visiting it and meeting Mr. Khatana. Does this show any double standards?
No, I met him once. As I said earlier, you know, you could meet someone once, but that's a day on which you probably met and were photographed with 100 people. Yeah? Do you see the point? This is, you know, this gotcha stuff with just one photograph, this is not the argument that Robert's making. The argument he's making is this is a deep relationship that's gone on for a decade, which I think is a very, very long time.
If I could just say, Nigel has been in politics for 30 years. He's met thousands of people across the country. There is a world of difference from a visit and somebody or other posing with them for a photograph and the Chancellor of the Exchequer building a deep and lasting friendship with this disgusting extremist man. Posting photos, going around to his house for lunch. Come on, that's completely ridiculous. And Rachel Reeves needs to explain herself for what she's done.
Yeah, I mean, I met a lot of people that day when I was in that part of the world. And a lot of people in that mosque too, so, you know. Okay, and international law, well, it is whatever you want it to be, isn't it, really? You know, what is international law? What is it? Who defines it? Are we, as a country, inclined to be a law-abiding nation? Yes, we are. But it seems to me that the international law supporters and the human rights supporters use these things when it suits them and ignore them when they don't. So, look, I think there are some big questions to be asked about what international law really, really is. And, look, you know, no one's arguing that the structures that set all of this up, which were debated and worked on in the late 1940s into the 50s, no one's arguing that all of this was done with the very best of intentions after the horrors of World War II. But to say they're outdated would, I think, be something of an understatement. Last question is with Archie Earle from Unheard.
Thank you. Do you have any updates on the Labour defections that you mentioned about a month and a half ago?
Yes, I'll be doing a press conference next week at which I'll have a couple of Labour defectors, not members of Parliament, but people who played very significant roles in public life in the Labour Party in this country. That'll come next week. Thank you, everybody.